Israel could have gone the route of, some Western European countries, which have, there's been some acknowledgement, for example, here in the US of the genocide of Native Americans and some regret for it. Israel could have gone that route and apologized for it and tried to do what it could to compensate people and to give people their rights. Instead, it's gone full ahead with the ethnic cleansing that launched it as a state. And now it wants, to your point, now wants to eliminate the agency that keeps Palestinians refugee status in everyone's living memory. And somehow, as you said, by taking away the refugee agency, somehow that will just take away people's understanding of themselves as refugees. And Ehud Olmert, I don't want to discount the significance of him saying what he's saying now, but of course, where was he a year and a half ago when Israeli leaders made their intentions very, very clear?
Oh, well, basically, for the last 19 months, Israeli society, the Israeli mainstream, hoped that the genocide would work. That was the ambition, that it would be carried out successfully, that Gaza would fade away, people will be exhausted, there would be global fatigue, and then Gaza would be no more. And now they see that it's jumping back to the mainstream. So you see some Israeli sort of old guard or gatekeepers jumping and trying to salvage Israel's image to say, look, not all of us are like Netanyahu. The genocide is Netanyahu's fault. It's not ours. Look, there are good Israelis in leadership positions or that were in leadership positions before. But there's the other element. It's not that Israelis deny the genocide that's happening in Gaza. They know pretty well. And for example, I had a conversation with an Israeli journalist recently, and I asked her, okay, if Hamas is dismantled, if Hamas disappears, and the captives, the hostages are returned, and Gaza is fully disarmed, would Israel lift the blockade on Gaza? And her response was, she was very honest. She said, you think that Israel would feel safe living next to Gazans after everything we've done to them? Now they have a revenge incentive. We wouldn't sleep soundly. So they want them gone. That was basically the logical conclusion. We've done a genocide to you guys. You're not going to forgive us for it. So the convenient way is either we atone for it and make amends or we kick you out. But we have absolute immunity. So let's do that. And that's the point right now where you have European governments speaking. It's ridiculous in the way that it's like them looking at a murder spree, a killing spree, and condemning that killing spree while giving the killer a sharper knife. Or telling a pyromaniac that, look, setting a fire, playing with fire is dangerous, but here is a lighter, here's a gasoline and a Red Bull, have fun. And that's exactly the approach you're having now. You have Germany saying the war in Gaza is unjustifiable. You have German members of parliament saying there should be an arms embargo. You have the German chancellor saying, this is no longer a war against Hamas. And then the foreign minister comes and says, there would not be any arms embargo on Israel. Weapons will keep flowing.
You know, what you said earlier about how this Israeli journalist said, of course, we can never feel safe living next to these people because they're going to want to avenge us for all the killing that we've done, really reminds me of Himmler, Heinrich Himmler, the chief of the Nazi SS, who justified killing children because he said, if we just kill the Jewish adults, then their children will, quote, grow up to become avengers. So just one of the many similarities that we're seeing between the Nazi genocide and this genocide.
Well, Israel was using this revenge sort of logic as a legal terminology. So, for example, I applied once for an exit permit to travel out of Gaza, and I never got the permit. It's still being processed until today. If you open the website, it says it's still being processed. It's almost been 10 years now. And when I applied, I contacted an Israeli human rights organization. It's called Gisha, that provides legal help and advice to Palestinians in terms of freedom of movement. And the first question they asked me is, did Israel ever kill any members of your family? Or did Israel ever imprison any members of your family? Or did Israel ever bomb your home? Because if Israel did any of these things, you have forfeited your right to travel because you have a revenge incentive. You would not be allowed out. It was as clear as the sun. And that was basically the Israeli logic back then, like almost 10 years ago, consistently, ever since Israel imposed this ultimate regime of control. Like, people are always sort of horrified at China's idea that surfaced many years ago of like the social credit scoring system. Israel implemented that years ago. They now have it like the upgrade version of it, where they would give you a social score on whether or not you are worthy of living. So they would give you literally this artificial intelligence would scrap all your information off the internet, WhatsApp messages, WhatsApp groups, Facebook activities, Twitter activities, and it would give you a ranking, a number, and that number tells the Israeli drone operator or the Israeli army whether or not your life is worth keeping or if you are a legitimate target based on a social score. If any country on earth implemented that, even if it was North Korea, if North Korea did this, can you imagine how many heads would turn? It doesn't even make any mention in mainstream media.
And what goes into that score?
It basically what goes into it, who did you ever contact? So for example, on WhatsApp, it would have a record of the people that you've contacted, the groups you've been a member of. The messages are encrypted, but they would know who you've been in touch with. They would look at what kind of posts did you like on social media, for example, on Facebook or on Instagram, or what kind of posts did you post on Twitter or on TikTok. And they would scrape all of that data, the mass sort of big data, and process it through artificial intelligence to give a probability. How likely is this guy to be supportive of Hamas or supportive of armed resistance or critical of Israel? And basically, like, you have the Israeli system gospel, and then you have the next level of artificial atrocity is basically, it's called Where's Daddy, where once they pick up a target, they wouldn't bomb that target on the spot. They would wait until that individual walks into their home and sits down with their families and sleep down in their bed. And then they would bomb the entire family. So the entire family is erased, children, women, elderly gone. So in that sense, that claimed target was not the target, but was the pretext for bombing and massacring a whole bunch of people.
So, Mohammed, as we're recording this, there is talk of a potential ceasefire deal. The word from the White House is that Israel has accepted these U.S. terms. And as far as we know, the centerpiece of this proposal is that there's a pause to Israel's mass murder for 60 days and some more aid gets in. But after that, there's no guarantee that the genocide doesn't resume. From what you've seen so far, and again, this is all very tentative, what is your understanding of this new potential deal that's on the table?
So basically, you had the last ceasefire that Israel collapsed completely and did not observe at all. Israel violated the ceasefire that they signed, a written agreement Netanyahu signed. They violated it about 1,000 times. They killed about 150 Palestinians during the ceasefire, and then on the opening day of collapsing it, they killed over 300. So that ceasefire is obsolete now. Witkoff proposed a new one in February this year. In March this year, and that new ceasefire was discarding everything that was agreed upon before in a written agreement and proposing something new from scratch, in which it gives Netanyahu everything he wanted and tells Hamas and Palestinians, trust the graciousness of the Israelis, that they would feel sorry for you once all the captives and hostages are back, and they would stop the genocide. That's basically the premise. All the back and forth ever since was basically about trying to convince Netanyahu to provide any guarantee whatsoever that he would end the war after this. And Netanyahu didn't budge. So instead, the Israelis were telling Witkoff and telling Trump that they need to apply pressure on Hamas, on Gaza, in order for Hamas to become more lenient. But Hamas was already at their most lenient position possible. They were offering to step down from government in Gaza, handed over to a technocratic independent committee. They were offering to basically lay down their arms, what Adam Boehler, Trump's hostage negotiator, talked about, that they would lay down their arms for the next 5 to 15 years as a truce, as a ceasefire, and they in both Gaza, West Bank, Jerusalem. And they were willing to basically release all the captives that remained in Gaza on day one. And they went on and on with more and more concessions. They said, okay, the tunnels would be dismantled. There would be a protective mission in Gaza, an international mission. There would be a new security force trained by Egypt, Jordan, other countries that are in sort of peace agreement with Israel. And all of these that Hamas provided, it was basically a non-starter for Netanyahu. So on the day that Hamas sort of channeled to the negotiators. We are willing to lay down the arms. We are willing to not produce any new improvised projectiles or rockets. That is the day where Netanyahu comes out and says, no, this is a non-starter. This is not negotiable. And basically what he was demanding instead, he was saying clearly, the message was clear. He basically said, Hamas needs to disarm. They need to leave Gaza. And that needs to be done on a staged kind of theatrics where they would go walk on top of a stage, hand over the weapons to an international force, and then leave the other way and go out of Gaza and like wave bye-bye and keep going. And after that, Israel would stay in Gaza and would continue military operations for quote security. They would maintain operational freedom, which means they go in and out whenever they want. And they would implement the Trump plan, which is depopulating Gaza, keeping Gaza uninhabitable and tightening the screws on the population there more and more until they basically choose to leave, which is another word for forcible expulsion. When you give people a choice between staying and starving to death or being killed by bombardment or leaving and never coming back. So that was the Netanyahu proposal. All the back and forth ever since was what Witkoff called a bridging outline, in which he tries to narrow the gap, tries to introduce some more vague vocabulary. And he got very close a few days ago when Hamas announced that it accepted the Witkoff parameter. And then Netanyahu said, no, absolutely not. This is a non-negotiable. This is a non-starter. This is horrendous. We will never accept this. And then you had Witkoff taking a step back and saying, nah, actually, the outline that Hamas approved is not the one that I gave to the Israelis, and Hamas rejected the one that I gave to Israel, so Hamas is the one that is disappointing me right now. And then another round of trying to bridge the gaps until we got to the outline that we have now, where basically the US is saying Trump will guarantee Israel will not bomb you when you give half of the captives that remain in Gaza, half of the living ones, when you give them to Israel within 7 days. They will not bomb you for 60 days. And after this, we will negotiate an extension of the ceasefire, not an end to the war, but an extension. And that extension is conditioned upon the agreement of both parties, which means Netanyahu would say, give me the remaining captives, I will give you another 60 days, or else I will resume the genocide. And it says the US will guarantee that there would be negotiations between Israel and Hamas on basically ending the war, ending the genocide. And it does not specify any sort of time frame for these negotiations or clear parameters. It leaves it open, like it's filled with loopholes. Basically, Witkoff sat down with Ron Dermer, Netanyahu's close confidant, and changed the outline to something that adopts everything Netanyahu ever wanted, where it says, we will negotiate on the end to the war, including Hamas day after the number of hostages that would be released versus number of Palestinian hostages, captives, and prisoners. And it goes through some language, but the word including was the loophole to begin with. So in all of this, like even if you think that this agreement is impeccable and solid, Hamas has no incentive to trust that it would be implemented because the first one was never implemented. Then the Americans came and said, trust us, give us Aidan Alexander, the Israeli American soldier that was captured in an Israeli tank. Give Aidan to us without anything in return. And we promise Trump will say, end the war and aid would be allowed into Gaza again. Aidan Alexander comes out, Israel intensifies the bombardment. It doubles down, like literally the bombardment increased by about 100 to 200% as soon as Aidan Alexander was released. And then you had the starvation continuing and Israel allowing basically a trickle, less than what prisoners got in the Gulag concentration camps. So on the first day, they allowed about 9 trucks of aid, which is basically, when you divide it by the population, it's 4 rice crackers per person, 4 rice crackers as the only meal they would get in about 80 days. So when you have Israel basically violating the first agreement, and then the Americans themselves violating the first and the second promise, like what is the incentive to trust the third one?